prior stipulation, polling is waived and presence is noted. You may proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, Mr. Bundy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to see you back again. In this case, Mr. Simpson spent a great deal of time telling you about the crime that was committed. And it is here at the outset, in defining the issues, that I can talk to you about the true question in this case. And the true question is not whether or not a crime was committed. Certainly there was a crime committed. No one disputes that the two young ladies were murdered in Tallahassee. No one disputes that the other two ladies were assaulted. No one disputes that the other lady was assaulted on Dunwoody Street. But there is a true issue in this case. Who committed these crimes? And that's what this jury has been impaneled to find. The issue is, did Ted Bundy commit this crime and no other man? The issue is, will the state prove that Ted Bundy and no other man committed this crime beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt?
Objection to the argument, Your Honor.
Don't argue your case, Mr. Haggard. Considerable latitude is given to the state on conclusion based on no objection, and I will give you the same, but don't argue.
Thank you. I'm sure Mr. Simpson would agree that
Objection.
perhaps he does not agree. His Honor will instruct you that you are not to allow passion to come into this case.
I object.
It's argument.
We hope that the evidence in this case, because of the gruesome nature of the crime, will not cloud your reason. The issue, as I said, is what is the reliability of the identification? I'm going to take the state's, quote, best evidence here at the outset and tell you what I expect the evidence will show with respect to that. And their, quote, best evidence is Nita Neary, the supposed or alleged eyewitness to the intruder that was seen leaving the Chi Omega house on the early morning of January 15th. Expect that the evidence that the state will base most of their case on will be Ms. Neary's testimony. What I expect the evidence will show you in respect to that is that Ms. Neary came home at about 3 in the morning. She had been to what's called a keg party. She had been drinking beer that whole evening. She was tired. She was sleepy. She had a cold. And all of a sudden, she was surprised by seeing an intruder. At the time she saw the intruder, she paid no particular or attached no particular significance to it. She thought that it may have been one of the girls had smuggled one of her boyfriends in and he had stayed past curfew, or it could have been a burglar, or the first notion, she indicates that she thought it was maybe Ronnie Ng, who was the houseboy in the Chi Omega house, and he had stayed past hours. And she wondered what was Ronnie Ng doing there at that late hour. When she saw the man leaving the door, she was standing in the subdued light of the evening, early morning hours, what has been called dim light, She was 16.5 feet away from the man as he was leaving the door. She was standing behind him at a slight angle, an angle that only gave her a partial profile, what might be characterized as an oblique profile, just an angle shooting past his head, such as to give her the view that the intruder had a protruding nose or a prominent nose or a large nose. She saw this man for what has been called a fraction of a second, by her statement, 3 seconds at the most, and he was in a hurry. These fraction of a second, this glimpse, will become the most important seconds in this case. She will tell you that she saw the man carrying a log, what she thought to be a log, which later she thinks becomes a club. And she will admit that she saw the log for 2 seconds out of this 3 seconds. Most of her attention was what is called in expert testimony of Dr. Buckout, weapons focus. The evidence will show that when a person sees a man carrying a weapon, the person tends to focus more on the weapon than on the facial features of the man carrying the club.
Objection.
We have moved on that statement. You may say that you think it rather than reference to an individual.
Expect Ms. Neary will admit that most of this glimpse, these few fractions of a second, were directed to this log. The evidence will also show that she only was able to discern the man was dressed in a dark hat, dark jacket, and light pants, which I expect the evidence will indicate to you that the reason she could not tell what color the man was wearing as far as clothing was because of the dim lighting. She will also admit that this intruder was constantly moving. His movement was flowing, it was fluid. And the first time she saw him was when he was at the door. The door opened easily. It was a freely hinged door that all these young co-eds were able to open without any difficulty. He turned the door, his back rotated, his body rotated, and he was through the door before her surprise even subsided. She will admit that there was no real facial perception, that she saw no expression on the man that would give her an emotional impression, to be able to have a more deeply emotional impression and observe and remember.
I object, Your Honor.
You're arguing the case now.
Expect that the evidence will show also that Ms. Neary had what might be called a subconscious expectancy to see.
I think you're commenting on evidence now, even though you say it will show it. That's a conclusion of which the jury must draw.
I expect the evidence will show that Ms. Neary thought she was seeing Ronnie Ng. Later, Ms. Neary identified another man, Ronnie Ng. She will tell you and admit that, quote, the similarities hit me between Mr. Ng and the intruder. She will admit that under hypnosis, she said, Mr. Ng, quote, it could be the same man that she had seen as the intruder. The expert testimony will show that later, Ms. Neary was placed under hypnosis, which is a state of heightened susceptibility to suggestion, where her attention is narrowed and concentrated, and it uses imagination, and it causes the suspension of what is called our critical judgment.
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll let him argue that.
And that during this heightened state of susceptibility to suggestion under the hypnotist, she was given inappropriate suggestions by the hypnotist towards her memory, that there was a systematic pattern of punishment and reinforcement of her responses.
I will sustain that. Your argument, evidence now.
And I expect the evidence will show that under hypnosis, her responses were incomplete because the hypnotist did not allow her to make complete responses.
Objection.
I will allow him to make that.
I expect that the evidence will show, because of this hypnotic state, the hypnotist added to her memory unobserved details from the original event, that he altered what she did observe, and that he altered her visual memory of the original event. I expect that the evidence will show that also during this hypnotic session, she experienced what are called positive hallucinations, and that she saw things that were not there in the original event.
I object, Your Honor.
That's, Mr. Haggard, I think you get close to the evidence.
I would ask the court to instruct the jury to disregard the comment.
Court already has.
You will have to examine, in determining the reliability issue in this case of Ms. Neary's observation, what her original opportunity to observe was, and what her memory of that observation was.
Objection.
Sustained.
I expect that the evidence will show you that her memory had been contaminated,
Objection.
I'll let him say
that she had seen newspaper photographs of Mr.
that.
Bundy,
That's going into the evidence.
that during these newspaper photographs, she had seen at least 6 photographs of Mr. Bundy where she had become familiar with his face, and it is only because of this becoming familiar with his face in the newspaper.
Objection.
I'll sustain that.
All right. I expect the evidence will show that this newspaper familiarity caused her to make the identification
Objection.
I'll let him go into that.
later with Captain Pottinger. I expect the evidence will also show that she saw a sort of a profile of Mr. Bundy in the newspaper, aside from these other 6 photographs, that her mother, Ms. Neary, showed her these things. I expect that the evidence will show that she was not able to say anything more about Mr. Bundy when she saw him in the photograph than he resembles the man. I expect the evidence will show that she told Detective Bodiford that she couldn't promise him anything 3 times as to whether she would be able to identify Mr. Bundy. I expect that later the evidence will show the most hideous kind.
Objection.
I'll sustain that.
Expect the evidence will show that Captain Pottinger later suggested an identification of Mr. Bundy to Ms. Neary.
Objection.
With that is summation of what the evidence will show, I'll allow him to make it.
I expect that the evidence will show that he told Ms. Neary that she was to look at the prime suspect. And even after he told her this, suggesting for her to make the identification of Mr. Bundy,
Sustained.
Objection.
that all Ms.
Your
Neary...
Honor, why does Mr. Haggard continue after the
I
objection?
assume he's
Knew
starting on another sentence.
Yes,
Mr.
Your Honor, I am.
Simpson. If he gets back on that one, I'll take care of it.
Okay, thank you.
And after this conversation between Ms. Neary and Captain Pottinger, the best Ms. Neary could say was, "He looks like, it fits closest." And I expect that you will see from the photograph that Captain Pottinger showed to Ms. Neary a subtle form of suggestion.
Objection.
I'll let him conclude that, don't go into what it is.
All right. And I expect that you will see in the photograph that Mr. Bundy was the only man wearing dark clothing. And I expect the evidence will show that after Ms. Neary saw this photograph, she said about it, quote, "I don't know," referring to whether it was the man. Quote, "I
Objection to
don't
what
know."
he thinks she was referring to.
Don't, I sustain it. Now, don't go into that. That's argument, Mr. Haggard, within the confines, as you know.
And then later, Ms. Neary was taken to the courtroom in Tallahassee, where this case was first set for trial in October, and shown again Mr. Bundy, where he was the only man present in the courtroom, and she was asked to identify him there.
Objection.
Overruled.
And the best she could say then, after having seen him in the newspaper, having seen him in Mr. Pottinger's photograph.
Go back over the evidence you're arguing now.
All right. The best she could say when she was in the Tallahassee courtroom was that it, quote, "looked like the man." And I expect that the evidence will show, and she will have to admit, that she saw a, quote, "good right profile" of Mr. Bundy in that courtroom, and that she had an ample opportunity to observe him. And there was no positive identification there.
Objection.
Let him
And
go.
I expect that the evidence will show that last week Ms. Neary said about Mr. Bundy, again, only Mr. Bundy being present here in this courtroom.
Now, Mr. Haggard, I want to caution you before you say that all that was out of the presence of the jury, and if you open the door, I'm going to give the state some time to go into it. Go ahead, sir.
Ms. Neary has never been certain in her identification. And what you will find is that only her confidence grew after repeated and repeated suggestions.
Objection.
Sustain. That's argument now, Mr. Haggard. Bless your heart. Come aboard now.
I expect that the evidence will show that she was asked time and time again to make an identification by the police. And I expect that the evidence will show that her confidence is not a measure of her accuracy of her original observation.
Objection.
I'll let him say that. That's what he intends to show by the evidence.
Now, that is Ms. Neary's testimony.
Now, that's argument in and of itself, Mr. Haggard, isn't it?
Let me treat this so-called bite mark evidence. And I expect that the bottom line on this evidence is what we are going to show to you, and I remind you that we have no burden of proof, but notwithstanding that, we're going to show you that there are 4 or more other sets of teeth that match the same bruise marks. That there are more teeth that could make the same bite marks. There are many problems, there are many reasons. I expect that the evidence will reveal to you as to why Dr. Souvron's opinion has no reliability. First of all, it's common sense that
Now, that's argument.
I'm sorry,
You and I know that. Go ahead.
I expect the evidence will show that the skin is not the best medium for retaining an impression. It's not like you're biting into an apple or
Objection.
something.
I'll let him say that.
I expect that the state will not be able to show the dynamics of this alleged bite. I expect that they will not be able to show you what position the body was in at the time this bite was made, whether the leg was flexed, extended, how the skin was stretched, and this evidence will show that the elasticity of the skin is an extremely important issue in determining the dynamics of the bite. I expect that the evidence will show that there were two possible lower rings, meaning the lower jaw, that there were three possible upper rings, and that the two lower rings cannot be correlated with the three upper rings. So there's no way to ascertain the leverage of the bite. I expect that the evidence will show that this was a bruise, and as a source of a bruise, the body bleeds and it diffuses, which gives nothing but gross characteristics, subjectively gross characteristics. Expect that the evidence will show that this opinion testimony stretches the farthest
Objection.
fantasies.
Objection.
Sustain that now, that's
Sorry.
argument.
Expect that the evidence will show that there is no generally accepted standards for bite mark comparison. That there's no agreement as to what is consistent or inconsistent, or what constitutes reasonable dental certainty or reasonable dental probability. Expect that the evidence will show that there's no convention in the dental profession as what constitutes valid, sufficient number and substantial number of points of comparison and types, and how many are necessary to make a reliable identification. Or what is the proper method to be used. I expect the evidence will show that there is an element of what may be called the Heisenberg principle of uncertainty that is operative in this case.
Isn't that argument, Mr. Haggard? I can't get any results this way. I'm going to ask you now.
Well, Your Honor, to me that's a definite concept. And
All right. I'll be guided by what you say sometimes.
thank you. It will come down to the bottom line, as I said to you at the beginning of my remarks on these teeth, that we are going to show you that there are 4 or more other sets of teeth that match the same bruise marks. And that's as far as we have to go, or need to go.
And
And
that
answers
is
the
argument,
question.
Mr. Haggard.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
As well as I do.
I expect that the evidence will show that this alleged hair cannot be characterized better than the 3 races unless there's some individual. I expect that the evidence will show that this alleged hair cannot be characterized better than the 3 races unless there's some individual characteristics, something peculiar like dyed hair, that there's must be certain morphological characteristics, and there will be doubt as to its reliability all the way down the line.
Objection.
Sustain, disregard.
What I expect that all the evidence will show in this case is that this evidence, quite candidly, is manufactured.
Objection.
Now, Mr. Haggard,
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
there's going to be a line of no return. If you want me to do it, go ahead. not proper for an open statement, you know that as well as I do.
I expect that after you examine the soundness of the reasons in this case, you will certainly have reasons for reasonable doubt.
I'd like to go into that.
And these reasons for reasonable doubt, I expect, will continue with Ted Bundy throughout this trial and right till you retire into the jury room. And it's based upon those reasonable doubts that I believe that you will find Ted Bundy innocent of these charges.
Jackson?
Mr. Haggard.
Yes, Sean.
That's the end of the line.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are going to recess at this time. We're going to discharge you first and let you return back Monday morning at 9 o'clock. We'll again caution you while you're in sequestration, do not discuss this case or what you've heard among yourselves or with anyone else, nor permit anyone to discuss it with you. Mr. Watson, you may take the jury out, and everybody in the courtroom will remain seated.
Will the jury please follow me?
Gentlemen, ladies, we will start again Monday morning at 9 o'clock and follow as close as we can the schedule that we outlined this morning for the time that testimony is being taken in front of the jury. It will be to recess close to the noon hour, assuming again about 1:30, and go until about 6 each day as best we can during the course of the trial. Any further considerations by either side at this time? Anything further that you need? Ms. Good?
I'd just like to point out that Ms. Edge did state that she was diabetic and had to have regular meals, and I thought maybe you want to ask the jury if that schedule is sufficient as far as meal planning goes.
We have checked on about what time they're being fed now, and it's consistent with, that's one of the reasons we are going to follow that fairly close. By the time they get back over there, it's indicated it's close, similar to the schedule that they're running, and we'll give them the noon meal and give them time to be here on time. I was concerned with the same thing. I appreciate your interest in it. All right, we'll be in recess then until Monday morning.
Great dispatch, everyone. I report.